There is a version of acid reflux that never burns. No fire behind the breastbone. No sharp jolt after a heavy meal. Just a small, strange feeling that shows up every single morning. A thickness in the throat that water never quite clears. A cough that seems to come from nowhere. A voice that sounds slightly rough before your first cup of coffee. If that sounds familiar, stay with me, because what you're about to learn is one of the most overlooked patterns in digestive health. And understanding it may change the way you think about your own body for good. This is the mechanism behind silent reflux, the hidden cause of chronic throat clearing, and the real reason acid reflux symptoms without heartburn go undiagnosed for years. Most people believe reflux only looks one way: burning, pain, a meal that comes back to haunt you an hour later. But there is a quieter form of this condition, one that doesn't announce itself with pain at all. It hides behind symptoms that look like allergies, like aging, like a cold that never fully goes away. And because it doesn't fit the textbook picture, it often goes unnamed for years, treated with allergy medication, humidifiers, throat lozenges, everything except the actual cause. Here's the question worth sitting with for a moment. What if the sensation you've been blaming on dry air or seasonal allergies has actually been coming from your stomach the entire time? Not from too much acid, from something far more mechanical, something structural, something that has very little to do with how much acid your body produces and everything to do with where that acid is allowed to go. To understand this, we have to abandon the idea that reflux is simply an acid problem. That idea is complete, and it has shaped how millions of people manage a condition without ever addressing its root. Acid itself is not the villain here. Your stomach needs it. Stomach acid breaks down protein into usable building blocks. It defends against harmful bacteria you swallow every day without noticing. It helps your body absorb vitamin B12 and key minerals. A stomach without enough acid is its own kind of problem. So the real question was never about acid production. The real question is about containment. Picture the stomach as a sealed, flexible pouch sitting just beneath your ribcage. At its top sits a ring of muscle called the lower esophageal sphincter, a valve whose entire job is to open briefly when you swallow, then snap shut again, keeping everything below where it belongs. When that valve works the way it should, you never think about it. It's invisible, silent, doing its job thousands of times a day without a single complaint. But when that muscle weakens, loosens, or opens at the wrong moment, the contents of your stomach travel somewhere they were never designed to go. Acid, enzymes, partially digested food, all of it upward. That upward journey is reflux, not an acid surplus, a structural failure in a valve you've never consciously felt working until it stops. This distinction changes everything about treatment. If the problem is genuinely too much acid, reducing acid solves it. But if the problem is a valve that isn't sealing properly, reducing acid only softens the damage from something that keeps happening anyway. It's a bit like turning down the water pressure in a house with a cracked pipe. The leak slows. It doesn't stop. Now let's return to that quieter, more elusive form of reflux, the one hiding behind throat symptoms instead of chest pain. In medical terms, it's called laryngopharyngeal reflux, often shortened to LPR, sometimes nicknamed silent reflux, because it can exist almost entirely without the classic burning sensation people associate with the condition. Instead of stopping in the lower esophagus, stomach contents in LPR travel further upward, into the throat, the voice box, sometimes even the space behind the nose. And what irritates that delicate tissue isn't only acid. It's an enzyme called pepsin. Pepsin's actual job is digestion, breaking down proteins while it's safely contained inside the stomach. But when it rides upward with reflux and lands on throat tissue that was never built to handle it, it can physically bind to those cells. Here's the detail almost nobody explains clearly. Pepsin doesn't have to keep flowing upward to keep causing problems. Once it's lodged in throat tissue, it can lie dormant. And it gets reactivated any time that tissue becomes acidic again, even from something as simple as a cup of coffee or a glass of orange juice, hours after the original reflux event. That's part of why some people wake up with a raw, thick-feeling throat on days when they haven't eaten anything they'd consider a trigger. The irritation isn't always from a fresh episode. Sometimes it's leftover pepsin waking back up. If you've ever cleared your throat dozens of times a day without realizing you were doing it, felt like there was a lump that never fully goes away, developed a dry cough that worsens after lying down, noticed your voice is hoarser in the morning than by afternoon, these are the classic fingerprints of this quieter pattern. Because none of it centers on the chest, it's frequently misread by patients and even by well-meaning clinicians as a sinus issue, a mild chronic infection, unexplained allergies. It's not unusual for someone to spend a year or more chasing the wrong explanation before anyone connects the throat back down to the stomach. So if the valve is the actual mechanism at fault, what actually helps repair the situation? There are 3 layers worth understanding here, not as a rigid checklist, but as a way of thinking that lets you respond to your own body with more precision than guesswork ever could. The first layer is pressure and physical positioning, because the valve is far more likely to fail when there's excess pressure pushing up against it from below. One of the simplest, most evidence-aligned habits here borrows from a principle long practiced in Okinawan longevity culture: eating until roughly 80% full, rather than eating to the point of fullness. This isn't a wellness trend detached from physiology. There's a real mechanical reason it works. The heavy, straining sensation of being stuffed after a meal is the exact internal pressure that pushes against a valve already working at reduced strength, especially since sphincter tone tends to naturally decline with age. The goal isn't restriction or hunger. It's simply stopping before that internal pressure builds past the point the valve can comfortably resist. Liquid volume matters too. Drinking large amounts of fluid during a meal expands stomach volume right alongside the food you're eating. That adds to the same upward pressure. If your symptoms tend to worsen after meals where you drank a lot, try sipping less while eating and hydrating more between meals instead. Now, sleep position. And this is where the anatomy becomes genuinely fascinating. The stomach isn't symmetrical. It curves slightly to the left side of your body. And that shape has direct consequences for reflux depending on which way you're lying. Sleep on your right side, and the opening connecting stomach to esophagus tends to sit lower. That makes it mechanically easier for contents to drift toward that valve and slip through. Sleep on your left side, and the geometry flips in your favor. The stomach settles in a position that keeps its contents further from that opening, letting gravity work with your body instead of against it. Multiple studies tracking nighttime reflux have found meaningfully fewer episodes among people who favor left-side sleeping. If your worst symptoms show up at night, that cough the moment you lie down, the throat clearing at 2 in the morning, your sleeping posture deserves real attention, not an afterthought. For people who can't comfortably maintain a left-side position through the night, elevating the head of the bed is the next best strategy. And the detail matters here. This means raising the actual bed frame at the head end, creating a gentle 6-inch slope from the hips upward, not simply stacking extra pillows, which can bend the torso at the waist and inadvertently increase abdominal pressure instead of relieving it. Timing plays its own role too. Your stomach empties roughly half its contents within the first 90 minutes after eating, but full emptying takes considerably longer. Lying down while digestion is still underway means losing gravity's help at exactly the moment your valve needs it most. That's why a 3 to 4 hour buffer between your last meal and bedtime isn't an arbitrary rule. It's giving your stomach time to finish its work before gravity leaves the equation. Even things outside the digestive system feed into this pressure picture. Tight waistbands. restrictive shapewear, bending forward at the waist right after eating. All of these compress the abdomen from the outside, adding to pressure already pushing upward against a valve that may already be under strain. The second layer involves something most people have never heard of, even though it's been used clinically for decades: alginate-based barriers. Unlike standard antacids, which simply neutralize acid already present in the stomach, alginates work through an entirely different mechanism. When alginate meets stomach acid, it forms a gel-like raft that floats on top of the stomach's contents, essentially a physical lid sitting over the liquid below. Even if the valve briefly opens or weakens, that floating barrier intercepts material before it can travel far upward. For anyone whose reflux is driven primarily by pressure and position rather than acid overproduction, this mechanism is often more logically matched to the actual problem than long-term acid suppression alone. It's worth raising with whoever manages your care if you've never tried it. The third layer applies specifically to that quieter, throat-centered pattern, and it addresses something the first two layers don't directly touch: the pepsin already sitting in the throat tissue. Since pepsin reactivates in acidic conditions and goes inactive in alkaline ones, some clinicians have found that a simple post-meal gargle using a small amount of dissolved bicarbonate in water can help neutralize pepsin already lodged in that tissue. That reduces the persistent irritation between reflux events. It doesn't fix the underlying valve mechanics. That still requires the physical strategies above. But for many people, it measurably reduces that chronic morning rawness and the near-constant urge to clear the throat. There are also 4 specific substances worth understanding, not because they're inherently unhealthy, but because of the precise way they interact with the valve itself. Mint carries a quiet irony. The same peppermint often reached for to settle an upset stomach can actually relax the lower esophageal sphincter, potentially loosening the very seal that's supposed to keep things contained. Chocolate works against the valve through 2 mechanisms at once. Theobromine relaxes the sphincter directly, while its fat content slows stomach emptying, meaning pressure stays elevated for longer. Alcohol both irritates esophageal tissue directly and relaxes the sphincter. And because it's most commonly consumed in the evening, right before lying down, its effects tend to concentrate at exactly the wrong time of day. Tobacco use chronically lowers the resting tone of the sphincter, not occasionally, persistently, making it one of the more consistently documented contributors in reflux research. Coffee and tomatoes deserve a more careful answer than a blanket warning, because the research genuinely diverges here. Some people with significant reflux tolerate them without any noticeable pattern. Others find a clear connection. The same holds for citrus and spicy food. Rather than eliminating any of these permanently on principle, a more useful approach during an active flare is to remove them temporarily for 2 to 3 weeks. Let inflamed tissue settle. Then reintroduce them one at a time, paying attention to what actually happens. Changing several variables simultaneously makes it nearly impossible to read your own body's signal clearly. Reintroducing one item at a time is what lets that signal come through. It's worth addressing apple cider vinegar directly, since it comes up constantly in conversations about natural reflux remedies. The theory has some genuine physiological grounding. As stomach acid production can naturally decline with age in some people, insufficient acid can paradoxically worsen reflux by allowing food to ferment longer, generating gas that adds to internal pressure. But if your esophageal lining is currently inflamed, or you're experiencing active burning symptoms, introducing an acidic substance onto already irritated tissue is not a gentle first step, regardless of how natural that substance is. Damaged tissue doesn't distinguish between different sources of acidity. This is a strategy that, if it has a place at all, belongs only after esophagitis has been ruled out, and only with guidance from someone who knows your full history. It's also worth being honest that not every lingering cough or throat sensation traces back to reflux at all. Allergic conditions. asthma presenting mainly as a cough, heightened laryngeal sensitivity. All of these can produce overlapping symptoms. One frequently overlooked cause deserves specific mention. A class of blood pressure medications called ACE inhibitors, including lisinopril, enalapril, and ramipril, are well documented to cause a persistent dry cough as a side effect entirely unrelated to digestion. If a new chronic cough began around the same time you started one of these medications, that's a conversation for the prescribing physician, not necessarily a digestive fix. And there are symptoms that should never be self-managed, regardless of how mild reflux has felt in the past. Difficulty swallowing that is steadily worsening rather than occasional. The sensation of food repeatedly getting stuck. Chest pain you cannot clearly separate from a possible cardiac symptom. Vomiting blood or noticing stool that looks unusually dark. Unexplained weight loss. Anemia without a clear cause. These point toward things that require direct clinical evaluation. Possible ulceration. Structural narrowing of the esophagus. Tissue changes that need to be seen, not guessed at. If any of that applies to you, the right move is a timely appointment, not a home strategy. What makes this condition so worth understanding correctly isn't just comfort. It's the years many people spend treating the wrong target, because no one ever explained the mechanism behind the symptom. Reflux, at its core, is rarely just about how much acid your stomach makes. It's about pressure, about a valve's ability to seal, about posture, timing, and sometimes the chemical residue left behind in tissue that was never meant to encounter digestive enzymes in the first place. Knowing which of those forces is actually driving your symptoms is what turns vague, frustrating trial and error into something you can work with intelligently. So here's what's worth carrying with you. The next time your throat feels tight for no clear reason, or that cough shows up right as you lie down, don't reach straight for another lozenge. Ask what your body is actually pointing to, 'cause somewhere underneath that